Hi, I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode of the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show. I'm your host, Nikki Lowe, and today we're talking about emotions. And at the time of recording this episode, it's May 2020 and we're over 56 days into lockdown. And it's likely that at the moment we're feeling emotions we might not used to be feeling on a regular basis. There might be anxiety, fear, sadness, frustration. And those difficult emotions are now part of our reality. And whilst I'm a big fan of positive psychology and focusing on the positive, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that it is difficult at the moment. In the past month, I've had a close friend who's had a miscarriage and had to go into hospital alone to have a scan and learn that that baby's no longer got a heartbeat without her partner next to her. I've had another very close friend lose her dad and have a funeral where she could only have very few people at that funeral, and she couldn't be physically close to her mum to hold her and comfort her during the funeral. I've had another friend whose husband is feeling suicidal and she's navigating that situation. So there are some really tough emotions that people are having to deal with at the moment. So that's why I wanted to do this episode today and talk about how actually if we want to feel resilient through this difficult situation, our emotional intelligence is going to be key. And emotional intelligence is about being intelligent with our emotions, but that's a bit obvious, right? It's about being able to recognise your own and other people's emotions. It's about what we would call in emotional intelligence being intrapersonal intelligent and interpersonally intelligent, so being self-smart and people-smart. And the cornerstone of that is self-awareness. But many of us might not be used to being with our difficult emotions. Culturally, and particularly in the UK, we may not have been raised to deal with our emotions in a kind of healthy way. We might have been kind of raised with that stiff upper lip mentality. Or on the flip side of that, we might kind of hear the positive psychology culture of positive vibes only. So it's common for people to avoid or deny or ignore our difficult emotions. And we can think of our emotions as kind of positive or negative, black or white, good or bad. But the truth is that all emotions are positive and that they serve a positive intent. You know, the frustration, uncertainty, anxiety, worry, helpfulness, absolutely can be difficult to experience. But they're not negative in the sense that they're just chemically encoded data. They're signposts about what's important to us and the action we might need to take. And the truth is that our emotions won't go away. They're not biodegradable. It's almost like they're knocking on the door for us to listen, and they keep on knocking until they're listened to. And they are part of our reality at the moment. They're part of us. If we try to kind of ignore them or perhaps numb them through kind of Netflix binging or drinking too much or emotionally eating, which most of us are doing at the moment, and, you know, including me. But when we numb them, we become less of ourselves. We're less able to bring our whole self and our whole resourcefulness to this situation. And emotional intelligence is about being with all of our emotions, no matter how difficult, and listening to the data that they bring us to enable us to take helpful action towards what really helps us most and what matters most to us. So what can we do to actually become more intelligent with our emotions? The first step really is becoming aware of them, and giving them and bringing them into focus. So I would encourage you to check in with yourself about how you're feeling. And I'm going to put into the show notes of this episode. And if you go to wisdom4workingmums.com/34, the number 3 and 4, you'll find attached something called a feelings wheel, which is something that I use with clients to help them start to identify their emotions and give a vocabulary to it. And what I encourage you to do is print off that feelings wheel and just check in with yourself, perhaps a few times a day. Maybe while you're eating breakfast, having lunch, and perhaps having dinner, find an anchor point throughout the day where it can become like a habit. And ask yourself, what am I feeling at the moment? Because giving our emotions a name is the first powerful step in building our emotional intelligence and therefore our resilience. Because actually our emotional vocabulary is really powerful. Because what the psychologist Susan David talks about is we can create strategies with our emotions that are unhelpful. We can become what Susan David calls a bottler, someone who bottles up their uncomfortable emotions. But the trouble is we can't selectively bottle our emotions. As Brené Brown says, we can't selectively numb them. When we numb the difficult emotions, we also numb the nice ones too. So the research shows that when we bottle, we also experience less joy and happiness. But the opposite of that might happen too. At the other end of the spectrum, we might become a brooder. And this is when we get stuck in the difficult emotion and can't find our way out. In emotional intelligence, we talk about being over-controlled, so almost like a robot, or under-controlled, where we wear our heart on our sleeve with our emotions. And actually, the balance is about being free but in charge of our emotions, feeling free to express them and acknowledge them, but also in charge of what we do with them. So if you find yourself either being a brooder or a bottler, a really simple strategy to be with your emotions and still bring the best of yourself is coming back to that language. Because many people, when they talk about their emotions, say the phrase I'm. So I'm anxious, I'm stressed, I'm worried, which is a completely normal way of explaining our emotions. But when we do this, we become defined by our emotions. We're saying that we're 100% that emotion, which is rarely true. A more helpful way can be to say that I'm feeling, which gives us some distance and choice. So it's not fixed to our identity. Our feelings can come and go. Or an even better phrase of language to use is that I'm noticing that I'm feeling. So instead of saying I'm anxious, the next step would be to say I'm feeling anxious. Or an even better step is I'm noticing that I'm feeling anxious. Because this gives us a gap between feeling the emotion and what we do about it. And it can give us a sense of personal control and agency over our emotions. Because as Susan David says, our emotions are data, not directive. So we might be feeling fearful, and that's just data. It doesn't mean we need to do something necessarily to protect ourselves. So as a practice, I would encourage you to start describing how you're feeling and practice using the I'm feeling or I'm noticing that I'm feeling phrase, and let me know how that goes. Because we need to use the strategies that are really going to help us be with our difficult emotions but not get overly defined by them if we're going to navigate this current situation with more ease. Well, let me know how you get on. As I say, go over to the show notes, wisdom4workingmums.co.uk/34 to access that feeling wheel, and do drop me an email or tag me on social media because I always love to hear when you've listened and what impact these episodes have had. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdom4workingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.